Hi everybody, welcome back to another segment of Honest Participants Only, the Vulnerability Month. This is for my section on women and vulnerability, and today, or right now, because you will have just heard from other women, we have a really special guest, one of my closest friends in the world. Her name is Charlene. I sometimes call her Ashleey. I have to give everybody that caveat because I will flip between the two. So just in case I'm like Ash, they're like, does she think she's in another interview? So I call her Ashleey.
Or they might think you're bipolar.
They may do that. And
not that there's anything wrong with that.
I was going to say there's nothing wrong with it. And also I may be slightly, but I would love to introduce you to the world. So hi.
Hi.
Why are you acting cute? So guys, I will tell you that Charlene is in the process of locks in her hair. Does it not look amazing? Look at that.
Look, I'm 5 months in and I can start to see budding. So yeah, I'm really enjoying the journey now. I wanted to do it for years, but I think I have commitment issues. So I wasn't ready to commit to a hairstyle that you can't take out. But now it's time.
And actually, nowadays you can take them out. So
absolutely. And now I realised you can put a weave in with locks, you can do braids with locks. Actually, I still can do all the things I used to do.
Oh, okay.
With my hair loose. Yeah.
No, I didn't know that. Okay.
I've seen it. I've seen people do it. So I'm like, actually, in a month's time when I get bored, I'll just put a weave in.
Okay. Fair enough. So tell the people who you are, what you do, and what motivates you.
Okay, so hi, I'm Charlene. I am I'm a teacher. I'm a religious education teacher. I teach 14 to 18-year-olds. I am now head of department. I also teach PSHE, so that's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I'm also head of that department. And before I went into teaching, I've always worked with young people. I love working with young people. I love that. I sound so cliche, but that light bulb moment. Yeah. I'm also youth leader of my church. And yeah, I love to just watch the development of young people, watching them grow, helping them to realize their potential, helping them to love themselves, because I think that is so important. And I think that in today's society, we don't have enough real role models, if that makes sense. Like your everyday regular Joe down the road role models. So yeah, I think that's important, and that's what I do.
What motivates you?
Ooh, wow, that's a real tricky question. What motivates me right now is actually my young people, if I'm being honest. Obviously we're in this strange period of time. And there are days when I don't want to do anything. There are days when I don't want to do any work, days that I don't want to exercise. And then I'll get an email from one of my students and they'll be like, oh, miss, I really miss you. I miss the classroom. And it just reminds me why I do what I do. So yeah, they motivate me quite a lot, actually, without even realising that they do. So, yeah.
Amazing. You spoke a lot, obviously, in your description of who you are and then what motivates you about your young people. Mm-hmm. Why do you think, I'm assuming that's going to come into your answer to this next question, why do you think the conversation, firstly about women and vulnerability, and then on a broader spectrum about vulnerability in general, why do you think those conversations are important?
I think they're important because there seems to be a little bit of a negativity around this idea of being vulnerable and leaving yourself open. And actually, for me, that's not what being vulnerable is about. It shouldn't be a sign of weakness. It shouldn't be something that is looked down on. It shouldn't be related to just being over emotional. And the reason why I think that we should have these conversations is so that people can learn to be okay with their vulnerability and learn to accept that it's okay to be vulnerable and actually have an understanding of what vulnerability is. I think that as a woman, we are always told to be strong. Society tells us we are mothers, we're the homemaker, and therefore that's a lot of pressure. That's a lot of pressure on us to, have a family, raise a family, to always have the home ticking over if that's the way that you go down. And actually, that there's a lot of pressure in society to make us feel that way, but being vulnerable doesn't mean that you're not strong. You can be a vulnerable person or have vulnerable moments and still carry the world and still, you know, hold up your head and hold that crown. So yeah, that's why I think it's important.
This kind of comes down to your particular view, because I've been saying to the women, I don't want to come into every conversation and say, what do you think vulnerability is? Because what ends up happening is everyone gives me their definition of vulnerability and it follows the same formula. But when we get into it and it comes up naturally, I now want to know what you perceive vulnerability to be to you, not what the world thinks it is, literally what you classify it as.
The thing is, if you had asked me this probably about 5 years ago, I would have told you that being vulnerable is a sign of weakness and that it's being too emotional, and that it's wearing your heart on your sleeve. But I would say now, actually, being vulnerable is just being open and showing people who you are and not being ashamed of your flaws or being ashamed of things that have happened in the past or not being ashamed of just who you are. You know, I'm a talker. I like to talk. And I think there's a difference between.
No, I have to force you to talk.
I think there's a difference between sharing and telling people about who you are. There's a difference between doing that. And I think that that's something that I've always done. But letting people in and talking about my emotions, that to me is real vulnerability. And that is something that I am learning to be okay with doing. You know, I could tell you, oh, well, this happened today, and my student said this and that happened. But then I would find it hard to say, well, actually, that made me feel. And that is definitely about being vulnerable.
Can I pipe up and say what I think about you, in the sense that actually I think more, even on a deeper level than that, I actually think that you are great at.
While I drink my tea.
Go ahead. Typical you. Tea. Yeah,
cake, but I'm not allowed cake anymore.
Yeah, no. So, as far as I'm concerned about you, you are actually an expert at faking the over talk. You will, especially if you feel vulnerable. So because you're a talker, you can convince people easily that you feel comfortable in a situation, and you're already a talker, so you're maybe a 70% talker, right? So that's a natural thing. But when you're in a vulnerable situation that doesn't make you feel great, you will up that to 90%, and people will believe it because you're already a 70%er. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
but then you've got people like me who will be like, nah, stop it. Because actually it's not, and I would love you to be honest about it, because I won't be offended or anything. Be honest about the fact that when the people in your closest circle or whatever say to you, no, be yourself, it's okay to be yourself in that moment, whether that makes you feel like you're not allowed to fake it for that time because maybe that's what's best for you, or whether that makes you feel more empowered to actually not go to 90% in that moment.
I don't think I would. I think that I've learned to wear a mask. And I think growing up in the church in particular has meant that
I've heard this in every conversation so far.
The thing is, we are trained to wear that mask from really early on. You know, if somebody think about like daily conversations you have with people, and I hear it, like even I do it with my students. I'll be like, hey, you're right. And then they just go, yeah, you're right. I haven't answered the question. I've just said, yeah, you're right. I answer it back without actually saying, no, I'm not okay. Or yes, I am okay because, and I think if I feel that I've needed to put on the mask, even if you were to tell me, Charlene, you don't need to, like, just calm it down, my back is already up and the mask is already up, and actually it then just becomes bigger. And I think also becoming a teacher has made me perfect my craft, because, and I don't think people realize, as a teacher, from the minute I walk into my classroom, I put on a performance. From the minute I walk in to the minute that I leave, it has to be high energy, high energy, high energy. Go ahead.
No, I want you to finish first, and then
you know, and I think that because of that, I've learned it even more. And actually, sometimes I don't even realize when I'm doing it because it has become second nature. And I think it's only my honest, real friends that'll be like, you're not in your classroom now.
Yeah, but also I was going to say that again, to challenge you, and this is literally probably because I'm your friend and I cannot separate this in this conversation, because actually I think as much as you do play a role, I also think your students, if they were to look at the faculty, they will look at you as being someone who's very real with them and who says it how it is.
Yeah, definitely.
You can say, you will say to them, I'm
Definitely.
having a bad day today, actually.
Yeah, and I do. But when I talk about like putting on performance, I mean, even if I'm having a bad day, I can tell them, okay, do you know what? Today's not a good day. But then, my performance will dip a little bit, but I still have to be high energy because actually I want the best out of my students.
And
So sometimes you have to,
right?
absolutely. So I have to push back my emotions, but I am very honest, and I will walk in. I'll be like, do you know what? I haven't had a cup of coffee today. I've not slept today. So do you know what? Let's just give me a moment. But at the same time, I still have a job to do. So yes, I am real and I am honest, but I'm still, that mask is still on, you know, whether that be physical with makeup. And you know, I think sometimes when I am feeling rubbish, I put even more makeup on, so that you can't see actually how I am feeling.
So let's talk about role models. As we're kind of on that at the moment, we're going to go in a different direction in a second, but I want to talk about role models, and the specific question I want to ask is, because as a teacher, you're an automatic role model. It goes with the job. It is what it is. But in general, do you think that teachers educate, right? Mm-hmm. They teach you practical skills as well on some level. But things like vulnerability, things like how to be a good friend, you know, things like that, the kids are expected to learn those outside of the school walls. Do you think that you have a responsibility to model some of those things for your students?
Oh, absolutely. Being a teacher is so much more than just the classroom. I am not only their teacher, I'm their best friend at times. I'm their big sister. I'm their mum. I'm their banker. I am their cook. I bring food for them. I you know, give them fashion advice. I'm their agony aunt. You know, absolutely, everything. And if they will come to me about a problem with a friend, that they're having with a friend, I often will talk about my experiences that I've had with friends, and not to downplay that their issues that they're having with their friends, but I just have to remind them that actually the friendships that you make now may not be your friendship group later, and that's okay. You know, it's okay that in life people may come for a season. So I am very honest and open, and just remind them that actually I know that right now for them it feels like it's the biggest issue, but yeah, it's so much more than just a teacher. I am so much more. You know, a couple of years ago, one of my students got baptized, and I was asked to go to his baptism, and to me that was so beautiful that he would want me to be there while he kind of dedicated his life to God. And I was, that to me that was one of my highlights as a teacher, to be asked to go. And when I was there, his mum was like, oh, I blame you for getting him into this God stuff. But I was like, yeah, I'll take that. I don't mind that. I'll take that. So yeah.
I'm going to move slightly to the left or the right now, and talk to you about vulnerability and how much you think it goes hand in hand with mental health. But first, before you go down that road, I'm going to ask you to tell us about an experience you had. I'm thinking of one in particular, if you're happy to share it, an experience you had of when you were feeling particularly vulnerable and people's reactions, and how, you know, do you know the story I'm talking about?
I have many, so I don't know which one in particular you're going for.
This is the problem with knowing someone, but then having moments where you're just not on the same page. And the thing is, you probably know the exact story that I'm talking about, but I don't know how to trigger it without thinking it. So I'll just ask the question, and if that's the story that comes to mind.
Okay, let's go for it.
So yeah, no, I want to ask about mental health and vulnerability and how it's impacted, because I know that you've had a particularly bad situation. So after one of your breakups, yeah, you've just been
There's been many a breakup.
roulette of men. No, so after a particularly bad breakup for you, you were feeling low, and I'm saying that, listeners and viewers, because she said it publicly before, so this isn't me divulging her information.
Yeah, no, not at all. I'm very open. I talk about that quite a lot. I think it's important, and I think as I've got older, I've realised that actually, when you talk about your lowest moments or your darkest moments, you don't know how that can help somebody. So I am very honest and open in talking about my mental health issues and the things that I have suffered and gone through.
That's
But
wonderful.
I think
so that's perfect segue into, tell us more.
so. But this is the thing. I would say that I haven't always been here. I haven't always been so open to want to talk about. When I kind of first realised, actually, I would say that I'm a highly functioning depressant. And I say highly functioning because now I am able to function, and I'm aware of my emotions, and I can tell when the dark cloud is coming, and I can tell my triggers. Sometimes they're triggers, sometimes there isn't, and I'm able to kind of self-medicate, if that makes sense, without medication. But that's because of where I am now and being okay with talking about it. And I think when I was going through my dark time, I wasn't able to talk about it. And I think one of the main reasons for not being able to talk about it is because I've always given this persona of having my ish together.
Yeah.
And there was this, to me at that time, there was this kind of idea that how can I be depressed? Like I'm not the person that gets depressed. Like my friends come to me when they're feeling low, and I make them feel better. I'm always the person that's upbeat. I'm always the person that's happy. And when I realized actually I don't feel happy and I can't make myself happy anymore, and I'm just constantly sad, that was a real strange concept because I didn't get it. I teach lessons on depression and how to see the signs and what to do and how to get help and where to go to. But then when I found myself in that place, I couldn't see it in myself, and I was confused and I didn't know what to do. And I had gone to the doctor, and I remember just feeling sad, like really sad for a long time. And it wasn't just a sadness like, oh, I just feel sad. It was a heavy feeling, like everything just felt heavy and everything was just so hard. And I was going to school, putting on the mask, going to school, coming back home, and then just getting to bed and just crying and crying and crying. And you're right, it was after a breakup. But I think now that it wasn't just because of the breakup, but it was a catalyst of things. And I remember looking on the internet and looking at ways to end my life because I just didn't want to be sad anymore, and I didn't know how to make myself happy, and I didn't know how to tell my friends that I felt sad. So I continued to play the game with them.
Can I ask you a quick question, because it fits right in, and your story will continue smoothly. How did you find the strength to be vulnerable enough to go to the doctor?
Because I had to, and the reason why I say that I had to is I was pretending with my friends that I was okay, but I wouldn't see them, so I would message them just enough to make them not worry, if that makes sense. And then I reached out to one of my friends who she has been on antidepressants for a long time. And I remember I'd got to a place where I was like, actually, I don't want these feelings. I'm looking on the internet and wasting my life. I'm driving on the other side of the road. This is not normal and I need help. I don't know how to get it. So I messaged her, and my message to her was, what are the side effects of being on antidepressants? That's all I said. That's all I said to her. I didn't go into any detail. I didn't say that I wanted them. I didn't say I needed them. And within 2 hours, she was at my house. And she didn't come in the house. She said, get out, we're going for a drive. And we went for a drive. And she said, I don't want to know what's going on. You don't have to talk about it. And she said, but you need to go to the doctors. And she said, you need to make an appointment and you need to go to the doctors and you need to speak to the doctor. And when you're ready to talk to me, let me know.
That's so powerful, because someone else took the initiative. They didn't force you into your vulnerability in terms of telling me everything and let me figure this out, but they saw something different in you and they took a step that virtually saved your life.
And the thing is, as much she would not be my go-to. That sounds so bad. I think we are really close. But she wouldn't have been my go-to to talk about how I was feeling, because I know that she suffers with depression herself. And I didn't want to be a trigger. And I feel like that's another reason why I did find it quite hard to be vulnerable with certain people, with my friends, because I know what they're going through. And I don't want to then be a burden. You know, I don't want to add my ish to whatever they're going through. And yeah, that's what she said. And I went to the doctors, and I remember it so clearly, going to the doctors. And so my friend came on a Friday, and the next Monday was a bank holiday, so I had to wait until the Tuesday. And I remember going to the doctors because you can never get through, and I wanted an appointment at 8 o'clock. You can never get through, so I drove to Luton. I live in Bedford, and I called my school and I just said, look, I won't be coming in this morning. I didn't give reasons, and that's not like me. So my boss was like, cool, whatever, do what you need to do. And I went to the doctors, and I remember saying to the receptionist, I need an emergency appointment and I need an appointment today. And the receptionist was like, okay, what will happen is the doctor will call you back, and then he will
I know they're doing
assess.
their job, but give me strength.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was like, okay, fine. And then I remember she said to me, can you tell me what it's regarding? And it literally took everything within me to say, I'm having suicidal thoughts. And I remember when the words came out, that I expected her as a receptionist to be like, oh, okay, well, let me just, and she just went, okay, the doctor will call you later. And I just remember like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like,
This
there was
isn't
no
like his
urgency. Literally, there was no emergency. There was no urgency. She just was like, okay, the doctor will call you back.
And do you feel that in that moment you expected that response because you needed it? You needed someone else to be quick about it, to do something.
I did. I just wanted somebody else to deal with it. Like, and I felt like I had opened like this biggest, deepest, darkest secret, and she just dismissed it. Like, she was just like, okay. It was like I told her I've got a cold sore, or I told her I've got a migraine, or, you know, she just went, okay. And I was like, oh, interesting. So yeah, you know, yeah. So, you know, then I'd gone to doctors, and I spoke to doctors, and the doctor put me on antidepressants straight away. And then I started to have talking therapy. And still up until then, I had not spoken to anybody about, you know, what I was feeling, or the fact that I had now been put on antidepressants. And I remember telling my mum. I didn't particularly really want to tell my mum, because my mum is very anti-medication, actually, and I knew that she was anti-medication. And in that place that I was in, I was like, I don't care. I need something. I need something to get me through, because I can't do this by myself. And I made the decision that I would go on antidepressants, so that it would give me enough in me to be able to deal with what was going in my head on my own. And I remember telling my mom, and that, anyway, that's a whole nother conversation.
Later this month on Honest Participants Only.
Absolutely, that's a whole hour in itself. And she had told, I say my so-called best friend, because her mum and my mum are really close, and she had told her, and I remember she called me, and she was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you're going through all of this. I can't believe that you didn't tell me. Oh, you know, you shouldn't be on antidepressants. You just shouldn't. You shouldn't take them. You know, there's other ways. There's other ways that we can deal with it. And I was just so weak and exhausted that I just pretty much listened to her rant at me. And then she was like, I'm coming to your house. I'm coming. We need to talk about this. I really didn't want her to come, I'll be honest, because I hadn't cleaned my house, I hadn't showered, and I didn't actually want to be with people because, again, I felt like I had to put on this performance, and I was tired, just too tired to do it. But she said that she was coming, and I cleaned my house. It took literally everything in me to clean my house, to have a shower, to go food shopping, and yeah, she didn't turn up. Um, she didn't turn up that night. She didn't turn up the next day. And then I didn't hear from her for a couple of other, about 3 or 4 days. And then she sent me this long message saying that, right now I'm working on my dissertation. And I feel, so ashamed that as your friend, you couldn't come to me and tell me what was going on. And I feel like I can't fix this. So, just know that I'm here praying for you on the side. And I remember reading that.
Your desperate situation became about her.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd always known she was flaky, and I always knew that, she was a little bit self-centered. But when that message came through, I remember looking at it and being like, you're the only person that I've told. And actually, I didn't even want to tell you. I was kind of forced to tell you because my mum told your mum. And this is how you kind of reacted. So it didn't make me feel like I could talk to anybody else about it for
Yes,
a long
and
time.
the thing about that type of vulnerability is when, and it's coming to every single conversation. Yeah, get that tea in there before it goes cold. It's coming to every single conversation I've had so far about it. Is that, and please forgive me, I feel like I've got, when you feel like you've got a hair in your eye and you just can't find it, and it's annoying.
Let me blow it.
Thank you. No, it didn't work, but thanks. The thing about it is that when you have been hurt by someone, even though you know the character of that person, and even though you shouldn't expect from them what they've always anything other than what they've always shown you, because you need something, because you're hoping that this time will be different. When it hurts you that time, or when you are betrayed or let down that time, it can damage it can just damage you even further.
Absolutely, definitely. And I think I was already at a place where I didn't want to talk about how I was feeling because I didn't know how to. I have been raised in a household where we don't talk about feelings, we don't talk about emotions, you don't expose yourself like that. And then I've been in past relationships where when I did say, okay, well, I'm upset because it was always tit for tat. So I'm upset because, I don't know, you said X, Y, Z, and it made me feel. And then I was always met with, well, on the 25th of December, that's Christmas. I don't know why I picked Christmas, but on the on the 16th of July, you ate the last biscuit, and that made me feel like
right.
So then I just never really felt that I could tell you that I was hurt by you,
Unreservedly.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely, without getting something back. And I feel like that's definitely something that I have struggled with, going to the person who's hurt me or upset me and being like really vulnerable with them and explaining, actually, I'm upset because, and that's definitely something that I'm still working on now, and it's important. I think in order to be able to let go of past hurts, in order to be able to let go of situations, it's important to be vulnerable. It's important to let people know how their actions have made you feel, so that you can move on.
Well, it's interesting because I want to ask you about, you speak about that as if you have figured that out for yourself, and I'm sure you have, because this was a couple of years ago now, right?
Yeah.
But I want to know, in between that, and all of the conversations I have, you guys talk about the situation, then you talk about, the other side of the process, but there's a gap between being hurt or let down and figuring out that actually I now need to do this thing to move on. I want to hear, if you don't mind, about that gap. So after you were really hurt deeply, how did that impact you?
I stayed in that hurt, and I think this is definitely something that I do. I stay in that hurt for a while, because for me, it's not easy for me to let go. It's not easy for me to then dig down into my emotions. It's not easy for me to be vulnerable and to understand why I'm feeling the way that I'm feeling. So I often stay there for a while, maybe a couple of weeks or a month. Um, and then it kind of gets to a process when I'm like, okay, well, I can't allow this to dictate my life anymore. I can't allow it to affect my sleeping. I can't allow it to affect how I'm feeling inside. So I have to like kind of take a step back, and I started to actually, you bought me a journal one year. That's my 30th year, and it said on it something about sparkling. I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
And I decided that that was going to be the year of sparkling. Like Charlene is going to sparkle this year, and in order for me to be able to sparkle, I need to put things into perspective, and I need to have an understanding. So I started to write down my feelings. I started to write down um, exactly what was going on and how that made me feel. And I definitely think that enabled me to be vulnerable with myself in terms of being honest with how I was feeling at that particular time, which then meant that it was a little bit easier to tell the person who hurt me how I was feeling. And at first I started by having to read it to them,
Right.
because I wasn't able to just say it off the cuff. Um, but it is definitely something that I am still working on.
Yeah. How did you get to the stage from being able to read it to them and still obviously potentially having this fear of the rejection of what you're saying, and um, them coming at you with, well, you know, whatever it was, to
Mm.
the point where you were like, I'm going to say what I need to say, and then regardless of what you're going to come back at me with? How did you get to the stage where that, what they came back at you with, no longer eroded any of your peace?
I'll be honest and say that that's come from so the person who I'm with now, he's very militant, and I wouldn't say he's emotionless. That's not really what he is, but he's very much like, well, he's very rational with things and very black and white. And you know, if I come to him and I'll be like, okay, well, I'm upset with X, Y, Z, he's very much like, well, have you told them? Um, and well, my response always is no. And he's like, well, I don't understand why you're moaning to me, because you haven't spoken to them. So go and speak to them, tell them how they've made you feel, and then you have a choice. You get over it or you continue to dwell in it. But until you've spoken to them, I don't want to hear it, kind of thing. And he has really made me have to overcome that fear of being rejected or not liking what it is that that person has to say back. Um, and as a result, I would say that things have become a lot lighter. I feel like I'm carrying a lot less baggage, and it's definitely becoming a lot easier to kind of show people who I am or be honest with my emotions. I wouldn't say I'm 100% there. It's definitely still a work in progress, but it's important, definitely important.
I love that. I want to take you on a slightly different, in a slightly different direction. We don't worry, we won't be here really long, but um and again, it's because I know that this has been an issue for you. Now people will look at you here, they'll see the bright pink behind in your background, and they'll be like, oh, she looks so good, pink suits her, and you know, she's a pretty girl, blah blah blah. Actually, I mean, she alright. But they won't know the insecurities you have faced with regards to your being the fair skinned girl. And we spoke about this yesterday just as friends on the phone, and actually
Mm,
how you were treated growing up as the light skinned girl, and an expectation that was put on you. And then
mm,
also the car accident and your tooth. So the thing about and that's the reason I was like, I hope you know I'm going to ask you sensitive questions, and you were like, no,
mm,
don't tell me, it's fine. I say that because there is a perception. There's a perception about a pretty girl, and there is a perception that what you have to feel what you have to feel a certain way about. But actually, you have these insecurities that as close friends come up all the time. Tell us about dealing with those kind of insecurities.
It's quite interesting that you say that. So me and my boyfriend were talking the other day. He was like, oh, you don't have many dark-skinned friends. And I was like, that's true. Actually, that's true. And I think a lot of it stems from being in high school, and there really was a divide in terms of, you know, being the lighty or the mixed race girl. So lots of people thought I was mixed race, and that came with a stigma, you know. Back in the day, mixed race girls were seen as easy, like sexually easy. So I would have guys that would be quite dormitory to me and be like, oh, you know, do you want to put your mouth on things that my mouth shouldn't be on, kind of thing. And it was this kind of thing that dark-skinned girls would think that I thought I was too nice. And that was never my thing. I've never been overly confident in terms of being like, oh, when I walk into a room, everyone's going to look at me. That's not who I am. My boyfriend jokes quite a lot of the time that I'm not a typical lighty. And there is this kind of, there is this stigma that comes with a light-skinned girl, and that is the air of, oh, you think you're too nice, or you're too stush, or you're too stuck up. And I have been told that, you know, when I go out, that I give up this air of being stuck up. And I'm like, well, that's really not who I am. You know, I would think that I am approachable. I would think that, you know, I don't give an impression of being too nice. I don't think that. But there is definitely that kind of stigma that comes across. And actually, I don't have many dark-skinned girlfriends, because they don't like me. Like, that's pretty much what it is. They don't like me. I haven't been able to show them who I am, or be vulnerable with them, or show them that actually I don't think those things, and I have insecurities just as much as you, and actually I don't like my complexion, and if I could be darker, I would love to be darker. I'm the first person when
You
the
miss
sun
me
comes
rolling
out.
my eyes.
No, but this is the thing, you know, I'm the first person when the sun comes out, I'll strip off my clothes, I need a tan, you know. In the winter, I'm see-through, I look like paper, and in the summer, I'm like, brown me up, babe. You know, so, you know, I definitely, it's crazy that within our own community that there is this divide, and colorism is still, to this day, you know, still rife, you know. And I understand that it stems from slavery days, and that, you know, the light-skinned slaves would be the house slaves, and they were treated a little bit better. But we're not there anymore, and that mentality should not be carried in. And actually, that's not my fault, you know, and that's not a cross that I should have to carry based on the past.
And that takes us back to where we kind of started, doesn't it? In as much as breaking generational vulnerabilities, or the way people react to certain things, and where we started was talking about you as a role model, and you having to be aware of how you dealing with your vulnerabilities or insecurities or bad days will impact the people watching. You know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so important that things do change, you know. I look at the older generation, and this idea of being vulnerable to them is a sign of weakness. You know, I talked to my mum about stuff that happened in her childhood, and she talks about it very matter-of-factly. And I'm like, well, actually, that's not okay. How you were treated was not okay. How did that make you feel? And there's this, well, you know, my mum was just doing her best. But actually, I would say that's abuse. I would say that she physically abused you. Those beatings shouldn't be part of our culture. It shouldn't be something that's just okay. Well, that's just what Black parents do. Actually, if you did that to me today and I called the police on you, you go to prison. You know, and it's just, everything is kind of like, well, this is just the way it is, so we just get over it, rather than processing it, dealing with it, being vulnerable, and being able to then break those generational cycles, you know, and not then putting them onto me. You know, I definitely think that if my mum was able to be vulnerable with herself, that would mean that she'd be able to be vulnerable with me, which would then mean that I then in turn would be more ready to be accepting of my vulnerability, and I wouldn't have had to teach myself without having a role model and not having to, I said, go having a pretty much a breakdown to be able to then say, well, actually, I need to be honest with myself.
Okay, we're not going to talk deeply about generational curses because I'm going to do that in a different show with somebody, but I do want to ask you this question before the last question I asked you. How much courage did it take once you had decided that you need to view things differently, perhaps to your mum or your culture and whatever, and that you wanted to be a role model for the young people that are in your care? How much courage did it take you to go against the norms in your culture, in your family?
Oh my gosh, like, so last year, November, I preached a sermon at church where I spoke very openly um, about suffering with depression and about being broken and about like just not knowing what to do or how to get myself back. And I made this decision once I kind of came out the other end. Um, and I've said to God, actually, I had a conversation with God, and I said, you know, if I get out the other end of this stronger, I'm going to tell everybody. I'm going to shout it from the rooftops, and I'm not going to be ashamed of the, you know, what's happened, and I'm not going to see it as a sign of weakness. Actually, the fact that I'm now okay, and now that I have the strength, I am going to just tell everybody so that other people can realize that they're not on their own. And before, when I wrote that sermon and when I wrote about my experience, I cried a lot. I cried a lot, a lot, a lot. And the night before, I was crying, and I actually wrote two endings to my sermon. I wrote one where I didn't talk about my depression and I didn't talk about having a breakdown. Then I wrote one that was a nice ending, you know, the picture perfect, and we all lived happily ever after. Um, and the night before I went to actually do it, I said to myself that if I don't feel strong enough, I'm gonna go with ending B, and I'm not gonna be vulnerable, and I'm not gonna expose myself at all. And then in the morning, my boyfriend said, you need to be honest, and you need to show them who you are. And I was so scared. I was so scared of the backlash that would come. I was so scared of
Judgment.
yeah, judgment of, and it wasn't even from the young people, if I'm being honest. It was feel judgment from the older generation. It was also feel judgment from my mum, because she hadn't read it, she hadn't heard it, and yeah, and I felt like I know that she would take it as
A reflection. Your depression is a reflection on her
yes,
input. Yeah, yeah,
absolutely, when actually it had nothing to do with her.
yeah.
You know, this is not your story, it's my story. And I thought to myself, I can't keep worrying about other people's responses. I can't keep worrying about how it's going to make other people feel. um, I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to share my story, to give hope to other people, to normalize these conversations, um, because you know there's still such a taboo subject, and I'd say especially within the Black community, mental health is still something that we we don't understand enough. And I just wanted to start this conversation, and start this conversation in church. And I'm not saying that there is not power in prayer. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that at all. But especially within the church culture, there is this idea that, well, you're not praying hard enough, that's why you're depressed. And actually, the Bible clearly states that if you're sick, go and see a physician. The Bible doesn't say if you're sick, just continue praying about it. Yes, pray about it, but also seek medical advice. And that was my main reason why I was able to expose myself and be vulnerable, within a room of 200 people. I'm not gonna lie, after I did it, I was exhausted, and I think I slept for a whole week. I came down off the platform still crying, and that night I had the best sleep ever. Like I just, oh, it was great. It felt like a weight had been lifted, and I just felt at peace. But I still felt like emotionally drained. because I did. I put everything out there. I wore my heart on my sleeve, and I left myself open to judgment, to ridicule, and the response I got was so positive. It was more than I could have even imagined. So I was very grateful for the opportunity to be able to do that.
I think it's so powerful that this is, and it's a great story of being terrified of what vulnerability would mean, doing it anyway, and it resulting in continued growth for you, you know, as opposed to it being, I shouldn't have done that. It wasn't, because you said you came down, you were still crying, but you felt a bit lighter. And that was before you started getting feedback from people about what it meant to them.
Yes.
And so doing that vulnerability thing for yourself was clearly important before it was, before other people were able to see. Because sometimes we can be vulnerable and people don't believe it, and so they treat us a certain way.
Yes.
But when they could see clearly that it was authentic, because I remember the feedback that you were given and everything, and when people could see it was authentic, they were moved, they were touched, and all of those things. But before all of that, you had to breathe. You had to be okay with the choice that you had made once you got on that stage.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say to anyone listening who is struggling with maybe vulnerable feelings that lead them to feeling depressed, vulnerable feelings that lead them to feel insecure, and vulnerable feelings that don't allow them to feel like they can self-reflect and know who they are. They can't figure it out because they're so overwhelmed
Oh, yeah,
by all
yeah,
the
that's a
feelings.
big one.
It is.
I'd say that
Sorry.
first of all, you have to. A lot of it kind of starts with self-love, and just having an awareness that, sorry,
Yes.
having awareness that you matter, that your feelings matter, and that sometimes we don't have an understanding of our emotions or where they're coming from, and that's okay. I would say that you have to find your outlet. Now, that could be writing it down, writing a letter, keeping a journal, that could be drawing, could be painting, writing a story, writing a poem. You may not be creative, so go out and go for a walk. And while you're taking that time out, processing, okay, well, actually, so today I feel sad. And first of all, that's the most important thing, accepting the emotion that you're in, and then allowing yourself to be honest and open and vulnerable with yourself, to be like, okay, well, I feel sad because, and then once you can then understand why it is that you feel sad, you then choose somebody, and it is important to talk to somebody who you feel close enough to be vulnerable with. And the sad thing is that when you do that, you have to also accept that that person that you speak to may not be emotionally intelligent enough to be able to deal with how you're feeling. And I think that's the sad thing. The sad thing is that there are times when people choose to be vulnerable with other people, and the person that we choose is not emotionally intelligent enough to deal with it. And that can be damaging and that can hurt. But you have to accept that not everybody is going to know how to deal with it. And then I think my advice would be to people who have friends who want to be open and vulnerable with you. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to give advice.
This.
You know, I think when I was
You can just be there. Yes, that whole.
just sit
You
with
don't
me
have
in
to
my
fix
front.
me. I'm
Yes.
telling you. Mm-hmm.
Just, when my friend came that day and I said to her that, I want to go on antidepressants, she didn't ask me to talk about it. She took me on a drive, and we actually just sat in silence for about 2 hours, and I cried and I cried and I cried, and she just held my hand and then dropped me home.
People who get it, right? Like,
Absolutely. And I think that in itself, there's beauty in that in realizing that when somebody is being vulnerable with you, they're not necessarily doing it for in terms of they're not looking for you to fix it. So the first step is actually just being able to voice it, getting it out, to healing, to then being able to deal with whatever it is that is bothering you, upsetting you. Yeah, and that's important.
I absolutely love this session. I'm so glad we did it. I'm so grateful to you sharing your stories, your mum stories that I kind of led you into, and just for your willingness to be a part of this project and actually all of my projects. So thank
But
you
I think
so much.
for me, this one, the reason why I definitely this one, it's important. It's important for us to have these conversations,
Yeah.
you know, and once we're able to be vulnerable with each other, that opens us up to have conversations about mental health, you know, or about anything else. Because actually, if we can't be vulnerable with each other and be honest, then having those conversations are pointless and meaningless. You
And
know, I can
actually,
sit here.
in our friendship group, we have these aren't scary conversations to have.
No, no, but that's for us. You know,
Yes,
I think that many people are not able to be honest with themselves.
exactly.
And I think that if you're not even honest, if you're not able to be honest with yourself and vulnerable with yourself, then it's going to be hard. Life is going to be hard for you. And that sounds really a little bit stern, but it will be hard. Because first of all, you have to be honest with yourself. If you can't be honest with yourself and love yourself, then you can't expect anybody else to be honest and open with you. If you're not willing to give of yourself too, and that is definitely important.
You're awesome. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for being
thanks.
here. You can find more about Charlene at Charlene Ashleey if she wants you to follow her. If she
Yeah.
doesn't, then she won't allow
No,
you.
I do. So I have a blog, and I keep saying this and then I forget to put it out. I have a blog. It's called The Peanut Butter Philosopher, and that's where I talk about my life as a teacher, the good, the bad, the ugly. There's a lot of ugly, and the jokes. My kids are
Very funny.
funny. They're funnier than me, sometimes. But yeah, no, that's where you can find me.
Absolutely. So go follow the peanut. You've got an actual Instagram peanut butter philosopher page. You don't remember the password, do you?
I locked myself out of it, but the blog's still there.
Go to the blog. What's the blog address?
The Peanut Butter Philosopher.co.uk.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you, and I'll get you on more interviews, more projects, more things.
Anytime.
Bye bye.
Bye.